In every age, God raises people up to speak the truth to the world in a way that is currently relevant. Though our opinions should not be held with the same esteem as the biblical canon, we still carry the hope of Christ to the world. Our society has forgotten what it means to follow Christ. The bright lights of truth seekers are barely visible in the dim twilight of a post-Judeo-Christian society. We all see the darkness coming. All we can hope is to share the light that He has entrusted to us. This is Modern Apocrypha. Hi, I'm Jared.
And I'm Greg.
And this is Modern Apocrypha.
Welcome.
So,
indeed, there's been a lot of news, tech news, world news, a lot of news out for us to talk about today.
A couple of really interesting things happening that I think are pretty key occurrences, shall we say.
For sure. Yeah, certainly some wild flags to discuss for sure. One of the topics I wanted to look at was the Tucker Carlson Alex Jones interview. There's anytime Alex Jones is involved, there's plenty to discuss. But then there's also a new media, old media transition that's really front and center from the interview. I know that listening through it, that Alex Jones did speak positively about Tucker taking over the conservative media and grabbing the torch, running with the torch.
Yeah. Very interesting.
I know that the Alex Jones interview is one that was on your mind as well. What sort of thoughts, what sort of topics did you see in there?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to me is just who Alex Jones is and what his... and who Tucker is and what their roles are. Because, we talk about the dialectic and the chessboard all the time. And just as a refresher for anybody who isn't up on that, because this is going to play a big part in this conversation, the idea is that there are two different sides in this world that are both played by the enemy. If the world's a chessboard, the enemy's playing both the black side, like the World Economic Forum, and the light side. And we discussed a lot of this, and I think it was episode 4 or something, where it's Gnosticism and the dialectic. And the idea is just that both of these sides are played by the same forces. They just look different, and the reason for that is that it draws humans into the fight. So, in the case of the Alex Jones Tucker Carlson thing, this looks to me like the timing is hugely coincidental and fortuitous, because we're coming up on the 2024 election, and we'll get to a little more of the Trump thing later, but if I'm not mistaken, Trump's going to win this 2024 election, and in order to prepare the ground for that, there has to be some really interesting shuffling and manipulation and whatever going on. And so I see this rehabilitation of Alex Jones in the major media through Tucker as a really, really interesting thing. Tucker is probably not controlled opposition in a, what would you say, in a classic sense. I don't think he aligns exactly with most power blocks, but one thing I would note that's really interesting about Tucker is since he got removed from his cable news show, he went from being a big show to the biggest English language show in the world.
I do know that his ratings overtook Joe Rogan. That was one of the topics discussed.
Yeah.
It is certainly also sort of an endorsement of a candidate without an endorsement, because your direct endorsement might be detrimental. So he's got a bit of a dog.
Tucker on Trump?
Alex Jones on Trump. He can dog whistle a support without a direct support, so that those people that hate him so wouldn't fault Trump for his support.
Well, and I don't remember exactly what they said in the interview. Wasn't Alex Jones saying that he felt bad about supporting, who was it? Did you watch it more recently? At one point in the interview, Alex Jones was saying that he felt bad because he had unwittingly been a tool of a
The Antichrist. Yeah, the
yeah.
Antichrist type of way.
Well, and
That's certainly.
I
Yeah,
wonder if Tucker and Alex Jones aren't both on the white side of the chessboard.
oh, I could certainly see that. Yeah.
And the idea there is just that if Alex Jones is sort of rehabilitated on the white side of the chessboard, if he is made palatable, because when you watch that Tucker interview, Alex Jones comes off as a very sympathetic, very, oh, what would you say? Very acceptable figure.
I can certainly see that. He's an odd character for me, just every day, every time I've ever seen him, just because he has a face that looks exactly like an uncle. He's got a voice and a mannerism that is an uncle. He's so many members of my family that I recognize him on a very familial level. And so it's a little bit of a strange perspective for me to watch him. He is a little bit more heavy in the conspiracy theory than a lot of people that I know, but that doesn't mean that his conspiracy theories are outside the norm for me either.
Well, and I, what would I say? There are places where I have seen him be dishonest once or twice, but in general, he's just giving people information that is actually generally true. Most of what he has to say is actually true. So,
That was one of the comments I wanted to bring up. There was a quip about why he thought that he had been attacked and why he thought that he'd survived to this point.
mhm.
And he doesn't know, as no one would. But I think that one of the things that really works to his advantage in the way that he speaks is his actual manner of speech. One of the things that the elites can't seem to understand. And we've had a bit of a discussion in this with the way that artificial intelligence and automatic closed captioning works, the way the computer understands. He has a voice and a cadence that the computer does not understand. So, as we've had, I know this is a bit of a tangent. So, as Alex Jones speaks in the way that he communicates, you need a human being there to watch him to decode what he meant. And so he's saved by his turn of phrase that is so outside the norm, right? He has
Interesting.
he has layman's terms that the computer can't understand, so it requires a person to review his speech, which is why it took so long to target him.
Interesting.
That's my opinion. He believes that he just threaded the needle, as it were, between being attacked and surviving. I think that he was not targeted so directly because people like Trump and Alex Jones speak in a way that the computer can't understand.
I don't know. I actually don't know that I necessarily agree, but that's a very, very interesting observation.
Yeah, I watch a lot of closed captioning. It's
Sure.
something that I pay attention to. And here recently, there's been a really big shift. It used to be that you would kind of see the CCs pop up on the screen, the lettering as the person was typing, having heard the person speak. And now it's in advance. It's predictive text that it's generating. And Elon Musk, Alex Jones, those people, Trump especially, either are not well understood or are intentionally mislabeled for what they mean. Like one word will be missed,
Mm-hmm.
one thing will be just enough off so that the meaning of the sentences they say are not the meaning of the words they say.
Okay.
So I see that all. I see that all over the place. In a recent interview, I believe it was the New York Times, but it was certainly Elon Musk that was the interviewee. And following through segment by segment, every segment was relayed in an anti-truth, an opposite of what the meaning was for someone that was just watching, say, in an airport, just watching the CC, unable to hear the words.
Okay.
So you've got animated characters on the screen, and words saying what they said that don't match what they actually mean.
Huh.
One
Curious.
of the yeah, one of the Elon Musk interview I pulled out very specifically was that he, at the very end of the interview, he was doing an interview with someone that was trying to give him every chance to show that he wasn't a crazy man, and he'd oh gosh, what was the statement that he'd written? Like, amplify goodness, amplify um, de-escalation and calmness and kindness and those sorts of things. And so those two words of amplifying goodness, he put into Twitter, but on the CC, it had like block goodness. Instead of amplify, it said block. It literally flipped the meaning
Mm-hmm.
of what he'd said,
Yeah, I get
so
what you're
that
saying.
if you were just reading the interview, it ended on a crazy note instead of ending on the most homey possible note.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And so with that, I think that that's been a big protection for Alex Jones, because on the one level, it's kind of easy to disregard him as a religious nut, because he does speak in religious terms, and a lot of
He
people just
does.
don't know how to. A lot of people just don't know how to take that. Um, he also will hold to his opinions when he knows it's right, to the point of offending people. And once you've got someone offended, then the elites think that they've won and they can write you off.
Yeah, of
Right? If
course.
you right, you're not
Of course.
okay for public consumption. You're offensive.
Right.
You're
Well,
pre.
we wouldn't know anything about that. I mean, our relationship with the Overton window mostly just involves, like, laughing at its desiccated corpse as we pass it, or we just don't.
It's not something that's ever been a part of our lives. I remember growing up. My dad had those giant satellites. There was a big green satellite, so we could pick up satellite TV. And this was 82. This was early 80s,
Sure.
and you'd see the news would come through. Right? You'd see the news would arrive to the news desk. They would see what it would be. They would read what it would be, right? Like testing the words. And then they'd go on air, and never once, not one single time, did the copy match what they said. They never said the copy. So if you got the back end of the news before it was blocked, because nobody had a 20-foot tall satellite in their backyard for the most part, and when you got the higher level or the secret level information about what they were doing, they were never telling the truth. Right? So
Interesting.
that's one of the things that Alex Jones speaks about, is that he was a Iran Contra family. Right? He had CIA family members, he had military family members,
Mm-hmm.
and so even though he wasn't specifically trained in it, he was just naturally raised in a way that looks out for the conspiracy, looks out for that unusual, looks out for the pattern of what he was, his family was a part of.
Okay.
And I feel like that was kind of the way that I was raised as well, to keep an eye out for any large organization to be, of
Yeah.
suspicion.
Well, I mean, I certainly was. When I was raised, it was a case of anything that, especially the government, but anybody does, needs to be viewed with suspicion and sincere caution, because they're probably doing something squirrely. Turns out it was underestimated. I had no idea how squirrely or how bad it was.
Yeah, it's always been, my entire life, been quite something. One of the things that Alex Jones has brought up, and I'm kind of curious where you stand on this,
Yeah.
was the idea that the torch has been passed, or has mostly been passed. He doesn't feel like he really has a requirement to do it, because he's not the only one doing it anymore. Do you feel that's true? Do you feel like you want to step into that space and be one of those people? Do you feel that is becoming wrapped into the white and the black of the chessboard, and everybody's filtering to their sides and not making a difference? What do you feel about that?
There are places in scripture where it says that God, because they were so depraved and screwed up, that God abandoned them to their blindness, or he gave them over to blindness. I think that is the case for 90 some percent of our society, that they've been given over to blindness. And so, what I want to be, what I want to be is someone who spreads the gospel, someone who shows people the light of Christ. And if, as part of that, I carry truth that most people aren't familiar with, that's fine. I don't mind doing that. But I don't think that most people can hear me. I don't think most people have the clear vision to see the truth, even if it's placed right in front of them. And that so most of what we say on this podcast is probably never going to hit the general airwaves because people just won't be able to see it. It'd be like going in one ear and out the other. They just won't hear it. So would I happily speak the truth as I see it to anyone who would listen? Absolutely. The most important truth is that Jesus Christ bodily rose from the dead. God raised him from the dead, and through him we can have eternal life. Through him we can be saved from this insane hell pit that Earth currently is and will not be forever. That's the truth that I want to tell people. But, you know, are there other truths that I think are cool and interesting, like the whole dialectic thing that most people don't see, that there are two sides that are both being played by the same powers, you know? Sure, I would love to share those things. I think that they're interesting and useful and good, but I really don't think that most of that's going to get out there because I think that that is like the enemy's primary weapon. And so anytime somebody is pushing that narrative, it's going to make the major players they come in contact with really uncomfortable.
It's an interesting perspective. I would say that as I've had a lot of conversations, through marketing and just trying to work through book sales and whatnot, it's not quite as good as I thought it might be. It is worse than I thought it might be. But a lot of people will accept common truths. They'll accept the basis of what you say, the structures upon which you lay your arguments. But then they have a Darwinian block, and they just can't lay it at the feet of God. They can accept truth, but not give it to God.
Well, and there are certain truths that they can't accept. And that takes us to actually that I'm going to pull a little bit on the other interview that we wanted to talk about, the one with Tim Pool and Donny Darkened and Sovereign Brah. And in that interview, we were talking about Tim Pool being really uncomfortable. And if you notice, some of the places he was really uncomfortable was when they started talking about the dialectic. And they didn't call it that to the degree that I do, probably, but I do think they actually brought that up by name, which is kind of cool, kind of amazing. But
sure,
they made Tim Pool super, super uncomfortable.
And it is something of note. People should realize in a spreading truth manner that, and I'm not suggesting Tim Pool, right, but just people. There was at some point a program by our CIA that was set up in order to control information, to provide false information, to provide true information, but to be those pushers and pullers. They planted false UFO stories. They planted all sorts of stories all over the place.
They planted all kinds of things, and there were you can go online and find interviews with people who are former CIA who give you the extent of it. It's pretty insane how far it went.
So with that, in the Trump era, and even really to some extent, I feel like pre-Trump, there was a push away from sending someone overseas into dangerous areas where they might be shot, and it became much more of a individual working of their own accord for the government, in accord with the government, but kind of on their own, and they would just set up a YouTube channel, right? Obviously, Trump was not working with his CIA. He was not working with his departments, and so whatever pre-existing inertia that people felt like was the right thing to do proceeded on that path. So we have now someone like Tim Pool, that maybe Tim Pool is one or isn't, right? Someone that might have been an NSA or a CIA paid member.
It's now, yeah.
right? And that is now a friendly member that, but is not under the peril, and that's entirely possible for someone like Temple. I do see him as someone who could be government friendly.
Sure.
Excuse me.
Moving back to Alex Jones and Tucker, though, the idea to me that they represent the, what would you call it, the narrative of the white side of the chessboard seems really, really clear. It may not be, what would I say? Tucker Carlson is, for better or worse, just coming to the fact that the WEF have pulled the wool over his eyes and everybody's eyes, that the left and the dark side of the chessboard exist, and what they're doing is totally insane and outlandish, and they're succeeding. He's just supposedly just waking up to this, or is just waking up to this. It's hard to tell. Alex Jones has been awake to it for a very long time and has been telling people about it for a very long time. I mean, that's all pretty obvious. So it looks to me like they pretty well embody the narrative of the white side of the chessboard, which is sort of, and the way the enemy works, as we know from the whole Gnosticism model, is they reveal hidden knowledge to people at the appropriate time to get the response they want. And in this case, the hidden knowledge is knowledge that was not really hidden, but it certainly wasn't in the Overton window. It wasn't acceptable to talk about these things 20 years ago. They were just like, Alex Jones was the only crazy guy who talked about him 20 years ago, right? So now it's not so crazy. They're revealing this hidden knowledge to the world, bringing the world slowly around to the white side of the chessboard's perspective.
It's an interesting. I would say that I noticed as Tucker Carlson was being ejected from Fox, and part of the reason I feel like he was his acceptance of Christ. He really did start speaking in biblical terms, using God and good and evil, and being unable to tolerate the falsehood and the evil, right? So it's like he had a what's the word I'm looking for? Where the country revival. It's like he had a personal revival.
And that's totally possible. I actually think that on the white side of the chessboard, some of the enemy's most effective and most useful tools are people who genuinely have a heart for God, and have been manipulated into a position that is totally untenable. And Tucker's actually a really great example of that. If you look at his background, if you look at how he came up, where he grew up, how his life has gone, the circles he lived in, the worldview he has, all of the stuff about Tucker sort of points to me, to him being an eminently perfect tool for the white side of the chessboard, because he genuinely is a decent human being who actually wants to see good things happen, and real Christian people listen to him. But the background he grew up in, and the things that he has been exposed to, suggests to me that he's still in a position where he's pretty manipulable, because he really isn't willing to see things on the spiritual level that's required to actually lay things out completely. Instead, he's still bound to a perspective that is of this earth. And I don't necessarily think that that would even be something that Christ would reject him for. You know what I'm saying? It's like we're all guilty of that at some level. But I do think that it makes him a perfect tool. He isn't talking about the dialectic, is he?
I think that he's skirting the edges because he realizes the high threshold, or rather low threshold, for assassination. I think that he sees
Well,
his his speech patterns are such that he is picked up by the computer. That he is
and
immediately.
to support your point, and there is still an Overton window that most of the country is very much, and most of society is very much under the operation of. And what you understand what I mean by Overton window, right?
I do.
So there, if he were to start saying the wrong things, he would take a few thousand people with him, but he wouldn't take a few million. It would be he would start being dismissed, and he has made a business, he has made a career, a profession of understanding the Overton window and how he can act within it. So I think there's that portion of it too.
But at the same time, he does sit with someone like Alex Jones and say the words, there's nothing that you're saying that I can find fault at. This is nothing here seems like a lie. Nothing seems false. So you're not saying directly that I agree with you and that is true, but you're saying I can find no falsehood, which is almost as good.
Right. And what I'm saying is that a lot of the blindness that people operate under isn't created by God, it's created by the enemy. And when the time comes to lift that curtain, then the enemy lets that falsehood drop away and lets people see whatever truth it suits the enemy for them to see. And so in this case, I suspect that what we're seeing, and this will be borne out or not over the next 6 months to a year before the election in 2024, right? We'll see whether I'm right or not. But what I suspect we're going to see is that a big chunk of the right, the right wing in America, is going to wake up to what's going on the black side of the chessboard more than ever before, and that this is the enemy's first real move in making that happen.
It's an interesting place for sure. I think, I don't know, are we at a break point here?
Getting close. You want to take a break now?
I want to consolidate thoughts and try to get back to one of the Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson bullet points, but I need to look it up to get to it. So yeah, let's do a quick break.
All right, let's take a quick break then. All right, we'll be back in a minute.
Back in a minute.
Modern Apocrypha is brought to you by Bright Star, the forthcoming book by me, Jared Michaud, due to hit shelves April of 2024. For pre-release copies, head over to e6universe.com. Use the promo code Israel for 10% off with your order. Modern Apocrypha is made possible by North Arrow Coffee. It's the pro-life coffee company where 15% of every sale goes to a pro-life cause. And it's so good that even us non-coffee drinkers love the company. Everybody I know who I have given North Arrow coffee to who is a coffee drinker loves it. So the quality of the product is wonderful, and they're not a company that hates you. So if you're interested, head over to northarrowcoffee.co and use the promo code E6 for 10% off with your order. And we're back.
Welcome back, everyone.
So
yeah, just looking over the bullet point that I had for the Alex Jones interview, it really did just really scream to me of a passing of the torch or a consolidation of the base. The point of it seemed to be much more of a fight against what seems to be a black side of the chessboard push to throw as many people at the election as possible to disperse voting polls. Okay. That seemed like their big push.
So then there's the other point that we kind of brought up during the break that I'm like, no, we need to talk about this on the show. And that was the idea that one way or another, it looks like if this is sort of a push by the white side of the chessboard to bring Trump back in 2024 to bring the narrative on the right to a point where Trump could come back in 2024, then this could either be the start of getting him reelected, or it could be the beginning of getting him in a position to start the actual militancy of the white side against the black side of the chessboard, right? Where the
I could
white
see,
side wins.
right? I could see where a Republican landslide results in a Democrat president, and that causing just headbutting against the wall that people just haven't seen.
Well, and they're like, okay, we've had enough. We're going to make this change no matter what. And I could totally see that happening. That isn't outside the realm of possibility. God knows it came close enough last time to actually turning into something militant that it wouldn't be shocking if it was set up to be more so this time. And then that kind of gets us toward the Tim Pool and the other interview. Are you done with Alex Jones? We good there?
I think so.
So the other interview we wanted to talk about was Tim Pool and Donny Darkened and Sovereign Brah, and I was actually pleasantly surprised by how on point Sovereign Brah especially was in what they were talking about. What Donnie Darkened had to say about Trump being the Antichrist was very interesting. Some of it I had never come in contact with before.
And what were the topics that, just so anybody listening that didn't get that interview, what were the topics that were really built bullet points for it?
Well, I'm not remembering real well. That's part of the problem, but
Parts of it included his name, Donald Trump, being the herald of the ruler of the world, Trump being a small trumpet, and Donald being ruler of the world as far as name meanings go. Um,
those were minor points, yeah.
Minor points. Minor points. His face being on a particular coin struck me as.
Do you understand what the significance of that coin is? That was the most significant part of the interview.
And let's describe this coin. This coin, to me, I did a little bit of research, and it was kind of interesting. In this podcast with Tim Pool, they had a sort of a brass coin, a typical coin, but I've seen it as a silver dollar, sort of silver coins and semi-numismatic sort of concept.
Yeah.
And in its design, it's got a Zionist logo. It's got an Israeli government logo, and that's on the two left and right sides. On the bottom middle, it's got the face of Sargon of Akkad, I believe, and then Donald Trump. Who's the first person? There's an old Persian leader,
No, no. You're thinking of Cyrus.
Cyrus. But they do have an old leader with Trump's face directly imposed above it.
Sargon of Akkad is yeah, that one threw me. No, it wasn't. That wasn't who you're talking. Cyrus. It
Cyrus.
Was yeah.
Cyrus
the Persian, yes, King Cyrus, and then the other one is Donald Trump, and that coin allows entry into the third temple once it's built.
Also, quite interesting in the silver. Now, I didn't see anything specifically on the gold, but the silver should be something like 4 grams or 40 grams, or what is it? For a typical weight, it should be 40 or 4. Should be 4 grams.
I was going to say 40 is awful heavy.
Yeah, 4 grams. And the coins that they are shipping out are only 3.5. Not to be anything more than a pure joke, because you know that I'm pro-Israeli in any way I possibly can be, but to think that they're joeing people on the weights.
Well, pro-Israeli, that's a bit of a, that's not actually true. You are for the people of God, the Jews. But when it comes to the government of Israel, that's a bit of a different animal, and some of what they do, yeah, sure, and some of what they do, not so much, and yeah.
Yeah, on a political level, I do have a huge amount of respect for Israel and what they do.
Oh, sure. Well, they're living surrounded by enemies. I mean,
thriving, then, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It is an amazing story for sure. So this coin is blasphemous in its design. It's because of the, I would say that it claims a lineage.
I could see that.
To Trump that is not asked for.
Okay, it doesn't necessarily claim a lineage to Trump. Because Cyrus is on there, Cyrus didn't have a Jewish lineage. He was simply on there because he gave the aid necessary to rebuild the temple. And Trump is on there for a similar reason. The lineage is a totally separate question, and that doesn't have anything to do with the coin.
Correct, correct. They are doing some lineal testing to see if they can provide some lineage for Trump.
Well,
I
they're
know that
they're
was something.
looking. That was another one of the key points is they're looking to see if they can trace Trump's lineage to King David.
Which that is an unusual task to take on. One wonders what usefulness there is in that. You know.
Well, the idea here, and the whole point of this interview, and what Donny Darkened was on there for, was to try to make the point that Trump is being set up to take the role of the Jewish Messiah, to be accepted by the Jews as their Messiah in the modern age. Because remember, the Jews don't see Jesus as having fulfilled the role of Messiah. They rejected him. So that seat, that spot, that whatever is still open in their mind, and it needs, that prophecy needs to be fulfilled. And the idea would be the way they've always seen it, and why Jesus was such a shock is because they've always seen the Messiah as a secular power figure, someone who will take the Jews to the status of empire, who will rule the world from Israel.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a standardized Jewish precept in your opinion, or is this more of a Zionist Jewish precept?
No, that was what they thought Jesus was going to be back in his own day. That's what they thought the Messiah was to be even back then. And there are passages in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that point in the direction of the Messiah doing exactly that. But as we understand it as Christians, that's to follow his second coming. That's to follow him coming back to earth and ruling the nations with an iron rod, as I believe it's Revelation says. So yes, that is there, and yes, it is to happen, and they thought that that's all it was to be. So having a counterfeit Messiah would fit perfectly with the idea of the Antichrist from a Christian perspective. And I don't like to put too much weight on the idea of an Antichrist, because there are so many people who make him the central figure of the story of the end times, when the reality is that doesn't seem quite right to me. Yes, there will be a man of sin. Yes, there will be that figure. But it seems to me like people put way too much import on him instead of looking at the situation as a whole. And a lot of that actually comes from the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is an antichrist. Okay? Antichrist is just something that comes in that is other than Christ, that takes the place of Christ. And the Pope, his title is the Vicar of Christ. He is the representative of Christ on earth. Christ never said he was to have a representative. He is the priest king. He is the one true mediator between man and God. And so when you see other people who are impinging on that, you can say that is an antichrist. That is something that is other than Christ. And so what we're looking at here is a possible setup for Donald Trump to be seen as the Jewish Messiah, someone, an antichrist, someone other than Christ, coming onto the stage.
And I would push back that Antichrist, as my understanding of it would be, is similar to Jordan Peterson's anti-truth. It's not just different than, it's in opposition in every way.
No. and I'm speaking with some assurance on this subject because when you study the scriptures and you look at what Paul in specific says about the Antichrist, because he's the one who uses, excuse me, he uses that word more than anybody else. The way he uses it is as someone who would take the place of Christ. Now, if it is someone other than Christ who is taking the place of Christ, that is necessarily going to come into opposition with Christ. No question. So, in a sense, you're right. But it doesn't necessarily mean someone who is intentionally directly opposed to Christ. It could be just someone who sets himself up as a pretender who has, some kind of virtuous intent and winds up being opposed to Christ because you can't take Christ's place without opposing him. But to say, and the popular conception of the Antichrist is exactly what you said, someone who is set up to be directly opposed to him in every way. But actually there's a flavor there of the lie as well, because the lie the enemy sets up to take the place of Christ can't look evil and still fool even the elect if possible. And that's what Jesus said in Matthew 24:24. I actually looked it up today. He said that many will come pretending to be messiahs, and they would fool even the elect if possible. And the idea there is that you can't have someone who is a mass murderer who people see as a moral figure. The I mean, you can in some situations, but you can't have the whole world believing that about, like, Klaus Schwab from the WEF. He's a comic book supervillain. He's not an antichrist because he doesn't fit the mold well enough. He isn't a good enough counterfeit. Where an antichrist has to be a counterfeit of Christ to get people to believe wrongly.
That is certainly denoted. It is interesting in their conversation as they kind of meandered through their hour and a half of talking about it, that they kind of landed on the possibility of a Trump antichrist, and they also kind of landed on the possibility of a Elon Musk antichrist, and they kind of played around with it. With
you understand the difference between the beast and the false prophet, right?
mm-hmm.
Meaning,
I do.
Meaning, people usually they call the beast the Antichrist, and the false prophet is the one who points to the Antichrist. And the false prophet institutes the communication systems and control systems for the Antichrist, but the Antichrist is the primary figure, the way people see it.
Well, and with that, as they progressed, it did come up, and I think that I'm slightly more on the opinion that the end enemy is something more like a robot, like a non-human entity.
Well, that's essentially already spoken in Revelation, is that there are to be four different major figures there. You've got the dragon, you've got the first beast, you've got the second beast, or no, I'm mixing this up. But the idea is you have a beast, a false prophet, and then an image of the beast, which is set up to cause the world to worship the beast, and that image of the beast is given breath. And it has seemed to me for a long time that likely is an AI. So yes.
And in your metaphorical understanding or symbolic understanding of it, is it breathing life like breath, or is it allowing speech?
It is the term the Bible uses is given breath, as in given life, which does not. It is an image, meaning it is a made thing that is given life. And the closest thing we have to that in the modern world is AI. So would I be surprised to see it? Not even a little bit.
I
But
suppose I wouldn't be.
exactly how that works though on a metaphysical level, how would we know, man? You know, whether it's an inhabitant, being inhabited by an evil spirit, or whether it's actually given its own life, or what it is really hard to say. And I'm not qualified to even speculate. Well, I can speculate, but you get the idea.
Sure. Oh, other interesting topics from their podcast that struck me. I'd love to have a more of a discussion and more of a bullet point of types of eschatology, how they're broken down, and they had, I think, 3 or 4 types that they listed out. But
Sure, and
just
I
to
could
spend some
go over
time,
them real fast if you'd like.
that would certainly be one to look at. And then I have to bring up the birth control chip and its patent number that randomly spat out of the system. Did you see that?
The 060606 or yeah, it's
Patent
it
number.
isn't
Patent number.
just birth control. It's
Bodily control.
well, it's a device that does have birth control in it, but it does a little more than that as well. And I don't remember exactly what all it was, but the patent number is 060606. Now that's interesting, and it's the thing that keeps catching my eye when it comes to that particular concept, the 666 concept, is what it says about that. It says it's the name of a man and the number of his name, or something like that. And so I don't know. I honestly don't know exactly what that means as yet. I haven't seen anything that I think fits that perfectly. So I'm reserving judgment on that score. I think conceptually, I see how the concept of, I mean, we've talked about this with the Bitcoin, and I think that was like podcast number 5. We talked about this with Bitcoin, how you could have a situation where you could put the control of the economic system in an AI's hands feasibly in the near future. That's possible. But
That's one of the things that I've actually argued would be a positive, because there's always going to be crooks. There's always going to be people trying to break in, and if the thing is alive and fighting for itself to protect itself, it's going to be the most secure thing. That was my argument.
yeah, and I think that's terrible. I think
Oh,
that's
I think it's terrible.
No, I think what you're saying, I think your argument is terrible, but that's a subject for another time. Do you want to talk about the whole eschatology thing real quick, or you want to?
I do. Let me just, as
Yeah.
a quip, throw out there. I was talking to a young woman who is pro-choice. She's fairly on board with the pro-choice angle, and when mentioning patents 060606, she did not think, "Ooh, wow, I can just choose an app on my phone and decide whether I want to have a child." She said, "Oh no, they're going to make it so that you have to do something, get a social check mark, make enough money, be able to do something in order to turn it on, or you won't be able to have kids." Immediately,
Yep.
without a second thought, this
Well,
is not a choice for me. This is a choice for someone else to put upon me.
no, that's absolutely correct.
I was amazed that came to her mind.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that Jesus said about his disciples was that the things that have been hidden from the most learned are revealed to those who are simple and of no particular consequence. Am I surprised? Not terribly. When something isn't specifically to be hidden from the people, humans are actually relatively good at seeing truths unless there's a good reason for them not to.
It seems to be that way. The oddly hidden things throughout my life, the people becoming more woke or awake, and realizing the things that someone like you, me, or Alex Jones have grown up seeing our entire lives, and we
Yeah.
see that people notice it as well. So I suppose that is true, that it's odd that people just don't look. It's there to see, but they just don't look.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just odd. It's like I say, God gives people over to blindness. And that blindness is used by the enemy for his own purposes to to create a worldview that brings people to where that enemy wants them to be. It isn't just odd, it's intentional.
Yeah. Oh, more than two coincidences is not a coincidence.
Yep. Okay,
So,
so
eschatology is the study of the Old Testament, or is it every religion's study of the end times?
um, the word eschatology, to my understanding, is specifically used in regard to the study of the biblical description of the end times. I suppose it could be properly used for other religions, but I don't actually know the answer to that question. That may or may not be appropriate. I know that generally it is, when I've heard it used, because this has been a Christian society for so long, that is the way it's applied. And the eschatologies that I know anything about are all the Christian ones, and I do know something. I can put a name on them and put them in the places where they go. Right.
Okay, okay, that
So
was what they discussed in the podcast with Tim Pool that I thought they did not spend enough time on for anyone listening to be able to.
you're right.
eh,
They
Right, I
really
think
didn't.
it's
So
a really great point. It's a great topic. So let's take a second and define them and then discuss them.
okay. So let's see. The three main delineations are premillennial, postmillennial, and amillennial. Okay, and the amillennial one is a little hard to define because they think that eschatology is all symbolic. They don't think it's an actual description of real events.
And let's take a moment to define this. So eschatology is the study of the old times through the lens
Not
of
old
the
times,
Bible.
end times. The times at the end of the age.
Sure, as described in the Bible in
Mm-hmm.
Revelations. So it
Yep.
is a study of Revelations.
Well, not just
Um,
Revelation. There are many places. There's Ezekiel. There's Matthew. There are lots of places in the Bible. Revelation is the one that is most common to us, but there are lots of places that tie into a study of the end times. Daniel 7 is a great one too.
Absolutely, and so the premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial are looking at the promise of 1,000 year rule of Jesus as the millennial section, right?
Mm-hmm.
So premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial is pre-Jesus reign, post-Jesus reign, Jesus reign.
That's the idea. Yeah, the idea
Okay,
here is that in let's look at the postmillennial one because that's the easiest one to sort of put a box around right now. Postmillennial, it usually takes the view that most of the prophecy in the Bible happened around 70 AD and it's already done. And the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about what's going on today in terms of prophecy. That's the postmillennial view.
okay,
And there is some, in my opinion on this is that there is some value and validity in the way they look at things because some of what happened in 70 AD did did appear to fulfill some of that prophecy. Not all of it, not perfectly. And the reason for that is because it has to do with how seriously you take the language of the Bible. If you take it to actually mean what it says, then you did not have everyone on earth being not allowed to buy and sell unless they had a particular mark on their left hand or forehead in 70 AD. That was not the way it was. The language in Revelation is pretty extreme. It's all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave. Everyone is required to have this mark in order to buy and sell. And that's a pretty that's a pretty extreme circumstance. So you didn't have that happen in 70 AD. There were a lot of other things where if you take the language of scripture seriously, you can see sort of, you know how there are people, they talk about the type of Christ, how there are these sort of pictures of Christ throughout the Bible that are fulfilled in the person of Jesus. there are pictures of him. There are people that represent him, people that are like him, people that do similar things, and it all kind of points back to him.
Okay.
It looks to me like what happened in 70 AD points forward to something else that has yet to happen. But the postmillennial view is that it has already happened and that Jesus is currently reigning with an iron rod, ruling the nations with an iron rod. And, you know, there's a joke that says that the best way to make Christians angry at each other is to get people who believe different things about eschatology in the same room. And there's some truth in that. Where I personally come down is that if you believe Jesus is ruling the nations with an iron rod right now, you got a problem, because I can't take it seriously that he would let a bunch of pedophiles rule us if he had direct responsibility for it. I just don't see it. That's postmillennial.
I see. And so, just looking at the definitions, and then I'll go into a bit of personal belief.
Sure.
So,
Well, do you
part
want to
of
go to amillennial real quick, and then pre, or how are you wanting to do this?
well, one of the things that we're skipping because we're Christians and we live in this stuff all the time
Mm-hmm.
is that for someone that has not read the Bible, that doesn't have a reason why you'd want to come before, after, or during, why is it scary? Why is it something that does cause such distress for people? Is that prior to the millennial reign are the tribulations. There's a fair amount of pain and suffering that is described that exists for human beings on the planet.
Greater than
And
has
so
ever happened in history or will ever happen again, is what the
and so
Bible says.
it's extremely tempting to think that you won't suffer the suffering, that you'll be absolved or exempt from that suffering because of your actions. Right?
Well,
That's the idea.
there's a premillennial branch that goes there too. But the postmillennials, here's one thing that I actually have to say about the postmillennial view that's very complimentary, and that is that they take seriously the responsibility to build Christ's kingdom in this world. And I think they go about it wrong sometimes. I think that our great commission was to make disciples of the nations, but they seem to take that a lot more seriously than some of the people in the other eschatology camps. And I am all for that. I am 100% there, because that is the command we were given. We were told to make disciples of the nations. That's what we need to be doing.
Okay. 1,000%. Yeah, that's an easy enough task to take on. I think that it's something that everybody should be taking on just in their daily action, not.
I absolutely agree, and it's one of the things that I'm totally complimentary about. I think that that's important, and that is a good thing.
And then, so what is a millennial?
Amillennial is a real slippery one, and basically what it does is it reduces the anything biblical to do with Jesus reigning physically on earth to something that is metaphorical or symbolic instead of real. And
So saying that,
yeah,
saying something along the concept that Jesus' return would be a change in perspective, a change in our hearts, not a physical human being walking around that we call
yeah.
Jesus.
Or
We don't.
that he's reigning from heaven and not here, and that we, the church, are to be, and or something like that. And the reality is, in my mind, where that falls is simply not taking Scripture seriously. You don't take it seriously if you don't think that it means what it says.
It's interesting. I do have a personal, I guess it's an opinion as to how to view revelations, specifically revelations in eschatology. And I don't believe that the human being to return will be named Jesus. His name will be written on his thigh, and he'll have a new name written. He won't have the name of Jesus.
Well, you realize Jesus was never actually the name he would have been called by at the time anyway. It would have been Yehoshua, something like that. But reality is, we as human beings using different languages are going to end up sort of
Butchering it.
butchering that anyway. So it really, the idea is if he is real and he is God, he knows we're talking to him. We can use what name we need to use, and he'll know we're talking to him.
Sure. One of the things that strikes me, and I could be completely off base whenever I think this, but one of the things that tends to be true for biblical prophecy, and specifically biblical prophecy, is that the time frames do not line up. So a day is a year is 365 years because each day is a year. Right? Those sorts of
It
things
can
are
it can be very confusing and hard to nail down.
absolutely. And I also feel like if you read line by line and expect that line to stand on its own and with every line around it in a perfect way, the way that only the Bible could do, there are portions that as you go through um, feel to me like they are a process of time, and then it cuts and says, "From this point, no one knew." Right?
Yeah,
There's a particular section in Revelations that says that
yeah,
no man would know, but then it continues speaking. So it's not as if we wouldn't figure it out in the middle of the tribulation.
sure.
It also would lend itself to thinking or showing that um, the tribulation that does happen um, is like a frog in boiling water, not a frog on a hot pan, where nobody stops what they're doing. Nobody sees the immediate rush
Yeah,
of what's happening because it's a little slower
yep.
than is the immediate words. And I personally feel like a lot of the tribulations, a lot of the uh, uh, troubles that will happen, not all of them, but some of them have been expressed over time since 70 AD. So
Well,
I
and
believe that,
there are portions of that can be true. It's like Jesus said, there will be wars and rumors of wars and disease and rumors of disease and all of these things. There's going to be a lot of this stuff happening before this time comes about. And then he talks about what exactly is to happen when the time comes about. And there are different ways to sort of read that whole thing. But do you want me to hit the last one?
yeah, yeah,
Premillennial. Okay, so there are two varieties of premillennial, and one of them looks to me like a red herring, but there are more people who believe it than believe the other in pop culture. And I think that's intentional. I think that's the enemy at work. So, historical premillennialism is the idea that we have yet to see the tribulation, that it is still to come, and that basically that it'll happen sort of as the Bible says it'll happen when it comes about. Then there's dispensational premillennialism, which is a variety of that was sort of popularized early in the 20th century, back in the early 1900s, and it has a heavy Zionist influence. So the idea is that the people who are dispensational premillennials love everything that Israel does and can do, and they want to bring the tribulation about as fast as possible because they believe that they're going to get pulled out before it ever happens. The rapture.
I
Okay.
see.
And you know, there is let's parse this down a little bit. It looks to me in reading the scripture, and I actually did some study on this in the not too distant past to see what I thought, because I have seen these views expressed and I didn't know where to go. So I looked at it. And I would encourage anybody who's watching this who is curious about it to do your own research. Don't believe what I say. Don't take my word for it. Actually look into it yourself. But what I came up with is something like this. There are a couple of different events. You have the tribulation. At some point in this, you have Jesus return for his body, for his church, for his bride. And then at a different point, you have him return with his bride, right? So the dispensational view is that before the tribulation happens, Jesus shows up, pulls the church out. The tribulation happens, then he returns after the tribulation with us. So we don't have to be part of all the scary bad stuff that happens. But that kind of ignores some pretty serious indications, and it ignores everything that has ever happened in history before.
And I feel like personally that it ignores God's word. God says that if you would die by the sword, you will die by the sword. If you would, right, there's
You
nothing.
called it, man. I think you're right. I think that what it's basically, I think the way it probably goes down, and well, and then there's you remember the parable of the virgins who some run out of oil and others don't.
I don't, not from that description.
Ooh, okay. So Jesus, in one of his parables, talks about a bridegroom who is going to come for his bride, and the virgins are waiting up for him, and some of them brought plenty of oil for their lamps, and others didn't, and some of the lamps go out, and they're like, "Well, we can we borrow some of your oil?" And the others are like, "We don't have enough for both of us. You're going to have to go get your own oil." And the bridegroom comes back while they're off getting their own oil, and they're rejected. And the symbolism here, but and what it says is the bridegroom tarried on his way. He
Took his time.
took his time. He didn't show up when he was supposed to show up, they thought. And so the idea is this is a perfect parable for Christ's return. The bridegroom is Christ. He didn't come back when everybody thought he would. Some people who are waiting for him run out of oil. They run out of conviction. They run dry on their faith, and
Mm-hmm.
others don't. And it looks to me like this dispensational premillennial thing is a direct attempt by the enemy to get people to run out of oil while they're waiting for Christ. Because, as you said, those who are to die by the sword die by the sword. Those who are to go to the, yeah, to that all the things that are to happen. And then it talks about people whose robes have been washed white in the tribulation, which says to me, we're going to be here till nearly the end of this thing. Jesus shows up for his church. God pours out his wrath on the earth briefly, and then Jesus returns with his church. I think we're looking at probably mid-trib to very end of trib rapture. It will happen. There is hard scriptural indication that it is going to happen, but the idea is probably that it isn't going to happen until near the end.
Something else that strikes me as an unusual way to think about the rapture. As far as I know, only Enoch was the unslain. Everyone must die and then be reborn. So even the raptured will die.
No,
Yes, no?
no. This is the one. This is the one instance where there is scriptural indication that those people who are taken up to be with Christ will be, in the blink of an eye, will be transmuted to be like him. So the idea is that if you last that long, you don't have to die. Personally, I almost think I'd rather die, because that sounds like a pretty awful time. But I'm here's the other thing though, and let me say this for viewers, because I don't want people to be discouraged. I think it's likely that we are to face the tribulation, sometime in the next few decades. I don't think we're there today, but I think it's coming. And if that's the case, this isn't something to be discouraged about. This isn't something to dread. This isn't like, oh, things have to be horrible. This is a case of, you remember in Revelation, it talks about those who conquered by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and by not loving their life unto the death, and how God is going to pour out his Spirit in those days on the people, like essentially like never before. And that where sin abounds, grace abounds the more. If this is true, we get to live through the most amazing time in human history, and God will bear us up. He will carry us. So this isn't something to be afraid of. This is something to look forward to, in that we have more opportunity to have an impact for Christ in that time than ever in history, from the time he came until now, and probably ever after that. So, you know, if people want to huddle, if people want to be afraid, I totally understand. I feel it too, but I choose not to do that. I choose faith. He'll carry us.
I certainly agree 1,000%. There's nothing to specifically be worried about. Um, that if you look at the tribulations and their description, and you allow for them to have happened over time, which I personally do, um, great earthquakes of immigration, great failures of states falling, and millions and millions and millions of people dying. These things have happened. Right? These aren't fairy tales. These are daily news, and they've been our history for as long as we've had histories.
Well, and there may be a time when it is much more intense than ever before, but we just don't know. We just don't
We,
know.
we really don't have an iron grasp on what the truth could be in this. We don't see the I don't see the future. Um, and yeah, definitely don't want to put down anybody's gifts, but at the same time, I do feel like if I read the tribulations from the beginning of Revelations to about 2/3 of the way through, um, prior to the great prostitute being punished, prior to that, I feel like most of what I see written has happened at scale over time. We just see it everywhere. So it's not as if, uh,
You
you
know,
know,
it really depends on how you look at Revelation. When you actually look at the way it was written and the style of the literature, I think that this is actually another whole podcast, and I'm not that knowledgeable. I'd almost want to bring on somebody who knows way more about this than I do, because the idea here is that Revelation is written in 7 repetitious cycles that describe the same set of events in sort of a more and more intense rendition as you go on. So you're not. It's really hard for me, at least, to tell what's before and what's after and what's whatever, because if it's describing the same set of events like 7 different times throughout the book, then it's really hard to tell what goes where.
and I don't feel like it says anything about them not happening congruently. Does it say that there's a section in Revelations where it's describing tribulations as cups being poured over the earth? Does it describe in that concept of the distribution of the tribulation as one tribulation and then it's done, and then a second tribulation that's done, or one, and while one's still going on, two can happen, and while two's still going on, three can happen? I understand that they could overlap.
Well, they could, and they probably do, and I think it wouldn't surprise me when all of this comes out and we're standing next to Christ and we find out that it all happened over time. It also wouldn't surprise me for us to go through the most terrible period of human history in 7 years consecutively, where all of it comes down at once. I could see either extreme being true, and just because we have so little grasp on that prophecy. The purpose of prophecy is not to predict the future for you, it's to help you recognize a situation when you get there. And we're getting toward it. We're not there quite yet, but we can see the signs. We can see the season's here. The season's coming. We can see the events lining up, but we're not in the midst of it yet. And with that, anything you want to say before we call it?
No, I think that's a great place to stop for the moment. Thanks everyone for stopping by, and we'll see you again real soon.